Castle. My name is Amii Castle. I see some friendly faces. I see some new faces. So just real quick about me. So I have some street cred to be up here talking to you about these constitutional amendments. I was a practicing lawyer in downtown Kansas City for 20 years. And 10 years ago, I got my dream job teaching at KU. So I'm a professor at KU. I teach at the law school. I teach business law to business students, and I teach constitutional law to undergraduate students. So, I am here tonight to talk about, I'm going to scoot this podium over just a tap. I'm here tonight to talk about, the upcoming proposed state constitutional amendments. So, we know of two, okay, and I'm not sure if the legislature is going to be able to add any more constitutional amendments, possibly, but we know of two. One that's going to be on our August ballot, one that's going to be on our November ballot. So I want to talk about both of those. So, just for information, our primary, yeah, I got good names for it. All right. So our primary election is August 4th. That's the first proposed constitutional amendment that you'll be facing. The second one is on our November ballot, and that is what I call the voter suppression amendment. Even though it doesn't quite look like it, I'll tell you why it's the voter suppression amendment. So to get those on the calendar, make sure that you, as Jim said, make sure you're registered, all your friends are registered. And at the end of the day, I'm going to suggest that you vote no on both of the amendments. So, and I'll tell you why. You decide whether you want to vote no, but hopefully I will convince you that might be the better way to cast your ballot. So the first one, the one that we're going to be facing in August, is the judge amendment. So I'm going to read this to you, okay, and then I'm gonna break it all down, all right? SCR 1611 proposes amendments to the Kansas Constitution. The amendment, if approved by voters, would abolish the current method of appointing justices to the Kansas Supreme Court and replace it with the direct election of such judges. Now, in addition, the amendment will also allow justices, to make political contributions, hold office in a political party, be the chair of whatever's town Dems or whatever, and take part in political campaigns. Now, I know what you might be thinking, or I know what your friends might be thinking when you talk about this amendment. Electing our Kansas Supreme Court justices. Man, that sounds like democracy, right? I love democracy. It's not. In this situation, electing our Kansas Supreme Court justices is not a good idea for our democracy. So, sounds like democracy? It's not. Now, what I want to do is I want to talk about, so this would be an amendment to change the way we elect our Kansas Supreme Court justices, that one particular court. Now, I want to explain why that's important. So I got to start a little bit with the basics of law. So in Kansas, every case, civil or criminal, starts at the trial court level, right? The district court level. Now, in every trial court, there's a winner and a loser, right? And so at every district court level, the loser has, the loser has the right to an appeal. So an appellate court has to take an appeal, civil and criminal matters. Now, that appeal in Kansas will go to the Kansas Court of Appeals. That is not the court that is at issue here, okay? Now, our Kansas Court of Appeals, here's a picture of that. The Kansas Court of Appeals consists of 14 judges, and these judges, well, the Kansas Court of Appeals was created by statute. That's why this constitutional amendment wouldn't have any effect on Kansas Court of Appeals judges. So Kansas Court of Appeals judges are selected the same way we select our judges, our federal judges in the federal system. The governor nominates a judicial candidate and then confirmed by the Senate, same way we do it in the federal system. And our Kansas Court of Appeals judges are up for retention every 4 years. So that's going to become important in this discussion. Our retention vote, that's the way that we actually vote on our judges. We actually have a vote with our judges, and most of you know because you voted. But when you go to the polls, oftentimes the very last question is, do you want to retain these judges, right? Mm-hmm. So if we're really mad at a judge, we can say, vote them off, right? It hasn't happened very often in our history, but we have a chance. We have the opportunity to vote out judges we don't like. So Kansas Court of Appeals, they are up for retention election every 4 years. All right, so every trial court, every litigant loser at the trial court level gets to appeal to the Kansas Court of Appeals. Then the loser at the Kansas Court of Appeals level gets to, I think I'm okay. Are you okay? Right. No. So the loser, there's going to be a loser at the Kansas Court of Appeals, right? So the loser at the Kansas Court of Appeals gets to appeal to the Kansas Supreme Court. Kansas Supreme Court doesn't have to take that appeal. They don't have a right to that appeal, but that's where it goes. Now, this is a picture of our current Kansas Supreme Court. It consists of 7 justices, okay? And the way currently our justices are selected is through a nomination process. More on that to come in just a moment. So our Kansas Supreme Court justices are selected through this merit-based nomination process. Then, when a justice is appointed, a Supreme Court justice is appointed, the very next year, their name is on the ballot, okay? So they're up for retention the next year, and then every 6 years after that, their name is on the ballot. They are up for retention. We have a chance to vote on judges we don't like. Why is this important? Well, I'm a professor of law, and so you're going to learn a Latin term today if you don't know it. The doctrine of stare decisis. The doctrine of stare decisis literally translates into let the decision stand. So you've heard the term following precedent, right? Lower courts have to follow the precedent of higher courts. Well, all of our Kansas lower courts have to follow the precedent of the Kansas Supreme Court, right? So those 7 people that we have on our Kansas Supreme Court are incredibly important, making incredibly important decisions about our state. So how do we currently select our Kansas Supreme Court justices? Well, we have a nominating commission, okay, consisting of 9 members. All right. Now, this nominating commission, who is that made up of? Well, 9 people, 5 lawyers, and 4 non-lawyers. And so the way it works is that, I'm going to go to this picture here. For each congressional district, we have 4 congressional districts in Kansas, right, for federal. And so each congressional district gets 2 people to represent their congressional district. 1 attorney and 1 non-attorney, okay? So that adds up to 8, okay? And then we have the 9th member is an attorney who presides over the nominating commission. So I'm going to go back here. Now, so how are those non-lawyers appointed? The governor appoints the non-lawyers. The lawyers on the nominating commission, for each congressional district, the lawyers in that congressional district vote on which lawyer they want to represent them in that congressional district. When I was practicing attorney, I always got the film, the piece of paper about being on the nominating commission. So attorneys choose the lawyers on the nominating commission. The governor chooses the lay people, the non-lawyers, and then the head, the presiding 9th person, is a lawyer, and that lawyer is selected by all of the lawyers in the state, okay? So we have 5 lawyers, 5 non-lawyers. What does the nominating commission do? Well, when an opening happens on the Kansas Supreme Court. Justice dies or retires, we have a judicial opening, right? And so we advertise that, who wants to be a judge, right? And so judicial candidates send in their applications. And when I say application, I mean applications that are like this thick, right? Everything they've done in their legal career, all the writings, all that. So what the nominating commission does is looks through all of those applications, conducts public interviews of those judicial candidates, and then the nominating commission, after interviewing all those candidates, sends 3 names to the governor, okay, and the governor picks one of those 3. So the nominating commission, what they're looking at is the merits, the credentials, what has the judge done good, right? And so it is a merit-based selection. The nominating commission is trying to find the best judge for the job. Now, how did we get here? Why do we do it this way? Well, because we had something happen in the late 50s where it stunk. So what happened was in 1958, in 1958, we passed a constitutional amendment that said this is how we're going to select our Kansas Supreme Court justices, because what happened was back in, it was called the Kansas Triple Play, there was Supreme Court Justice Smith who resigned from his term early, okay, resigned early, so that meant there was a vacancy on the Kansas Supreme Court. Governor Hall, all right, who had recently been defeated in the election, he had been defeated in the election, but he resigned 11 days before his term ended, such that his lieutenant governor, then McCush, took over, okay? And so his lieutenant governor, Governor Hall's lieutenant governor, appointed Governor Hall to be a Supreme Court justice. And Kansans did not like that, all right? They were pretty mad. And so that is how we got to this system of how we select our Kansas Supreme Court justices. Now, why is it a bad thing? Why is it a bad thing to have our Kansas Supreme Court justice popularly elected? Well, just think back not too long ago when you have Elon Musk and the cheesehead in Wisconsin, and he literally poured $20 million into that judicial race. It was a race for their Kansas State Supreme Court justices, and Elon Musk poured $20 million into that race. He lost, his candidate lost. But what we will get if we popularly elect our judges is money, big money, PAC money, dark money, flowing into our state, flowing to these candidates. Now, what might happen if judges have to run for office? Because that's what this would mean. All right, like any other elected official. In this case, if we pass this constitutional amendment, our Kansas Supreme Court judges are going to have to campaign, just like if they're campaigning as a senator or a representative. They're going to have to get their political signs out. They're going to have to fundraise, right? They're going to have to spend time fundraising, all that time when they could be working on judicial opinions, right? So, but the point is in order to win in our system of politics, what do you need? Money, right? And so, unfortunately, when you invite this system, you're inviting candidates, judicial candidates, to take money from people, groups, special interest groups, and of course, they're going to be beholden to those groups, right? They're going to probably tend to make decisions that are favorable to those groups who gave them money to get them elected, right? That's not good. That's not how the law is supposed to work. Also, once a justice has their judge job, right? Well, They might want to keep their judge job, so they're going to have to run for re-election again. So that means all those decisions that they're deciding now, they might be thinking, well, I don't want to make that special interest group mad because I really like this job and I want to get elected again. So the concern is that judges' decisions might be influenced, current decisions might be influenced by the fear of not getting elected, not having enough campaign donors. Another reason why it's not a good idea to elect our state Supreme Court justices is because we're going to get a good politician, not necessarily a good lawyer, not even necessarily a lawyer. Anybody could run, right? And so we're going to get people who might not have any sort of experience or knowledge in analyzing the law and doing all the things that it takes to be a good Kansas Supreme Court justice. We're going to get good politicians. Politicians do not belong as judges. Plus, as I mentioned before, we already have a vote on our judges. We already have a chance on our ballot to vote the bastards out, right? We already have that opportunity. And so popularly electing judges is simply going to bring a whole lot of money to these campaigning judges, right? And they're going to be beholden to these special interest groups. Now, who wants this amendment? Well, anti-abortion groups want this amendment, and groups that fight fully funding public education. So those are the groups who want to elect judges. They want to pour a lot of money in so they can get their candidate elected. Now, if you think I'm just totally making this up about who's behind this, I'm going to share something with you. As some of you know, I like to write letters to the editor. I do it often. I've been doing it for years. I have a letter. I'm going to read it to you, so don't squint in the back. I'm going to read a portion of this letter to the editor that I wrote to the Lawrence Journal-World back in October 7th, 2022. Okay? So I was talking about Chris Kobach and Chris Mann and the differences. So here's what I said. For Kansas Attorney General, if Chris Kobach is elected as Attorney General, he plans to pack the Kansas Supreme Court with anti-abortion rights justices, and he's saying it out loud. Kobach wants yet another constitutional amendment asking voters whether our state Supreme Court justices should be directly elected. The sole purpose, according to Kobach himself, because I heard him say it in a speech, that's why I quoted it. According to Kobach himself, the sole purpose, according to Kobach himself, is to clear a path to slowly and quietly place anti-abortion rights justices on the state's highest court. He said that back in 2022. Those are the groups who are pushing this. Because they know anti-abortion groups have lots of money to give, and they want to elect those as Supreme Court justices. So, popularly electing our judges sounds like it's giving us power, and it's not. It's not. It is giving anybody with a lot of money power. That ain't me. I don't know about you, right? So it will erode our democracy. We'll have less qualified candidates, and we'll have candidates, judges, justices, beholden to special interest groups. That is not the way the law is supposed to work. So I'm going to tell you what the ballot language would look like, because I kind of want to point something out. Because they talk about, it says in here like pejoratively, like a majority of attorneys decide our justices now. And so, and we know it's 5 attorneys and 4 lay people. So this is what the ballot language would look like. A vote for this proposition would give Kansas citizens the right to elect Kansas Supreme Court justices as provided by law. Justices will hold office for terms of 6 years. The Kansas Supreme Court Nominating Commission, whose membership consists of a majority of lawyers, would be abolished. A vote against this proposition would continue the current system in which the Kansas Supreme Court Nominating Commission, whose membership consists of a majority of lawyers, technically true, provides the governor a list of 3 individuals to choose from for vacancies on the Kansas Supreme Court. Justices hold office for a term of 6 years and retain their offices if they win a retention election in which they do not face an opponent. So that's what you're going to see. That's what you're going to be voting on August 4th. So, like I say, my suggestion is to vote no. Now, I'm going to switch gears, okay, to the November constitutional amendment, and then I'll give a chance for questions. So, in November, we're going to face another constitutional amendment. That is what I call the voter suppression amendment. And so the ballot language, okay, I'll read it to you, and then we're going to break it all down and what it actually means. So a yes vote supports amending the state constitution to state that only a citizen of the United States is eligible to vote. A no vote opposes amending the state constitution to state that only a citizen of the United States is eligible to vote. So this is their explanatory statement. A vote for this proposition would clarify that only a person who is a citizen of the United States is eligible to vote. A vote against this proposition would make no change to the Constitution of the state of Kansas, and the language concerning voter qualifications would remain the same. So basically this is saying that this constitutional amendment will clarify that only citizens can vote. Now, like the Judge Amendment, sounds reasonable, right? Only citizens can vote, which is the case, right? But here's the deal with this amendment, is it's not so much the amendment itself, it's what they're going to do with the amendment. They're going to use this amendment as a basis to pass all kinds of voter suppression laws. So, what does our Kansas Constitution currently say? It currently says citizens have the right to vote. So, our current Kansas Constitution, Article 5, Section 1, says, every citizen of the United States who has attained the age of 18 years and who resides in the voting area in which he or she seeks to vote shall be deemed a qualified electorate. So that's our current state constitution. Every person who's over the age of 18 is eligible to vote in their district. So what's the difference in what the proposed amendment to what we have? The difference is that, so our current Kansas Constitution says that citizens who are 18 can vote, but it doesn't say that only citizens can vote, okay? And so the amendment would change that and say that only citizens can vote. Now, I know that's confusing, and you're thinking, like, what's the difference? What's the deal? Well, there really isn't that much of a deal except what they're going to do with the amendment if it passes. This only citizens can vote rather than every citizen can vote. It is subtle language, okay? But that is the language on which they will attempt to pass voter restriction laws, right? If we change it to only, then they're going to say, oh, well, now only citizens can vote, so now we need to change the rules to make sure only citizens are voting. So what's going to happen is, if this amendment passes, okay, what we will look at, what we will face from our Kansas legislature is a requirement of proving your citizenship to vote. That's the end goal. That's the goal with all this. And so we call that documentary proof of citizenship. In 2018, a federal judge already struck that down, but here we are again, right? So I'm going to talk about why proof of citizenship to vote is bad. And you probably know that. I know I'm probably talking to a friendly audience here. But I want to bring in the SAVE Act, because we're talking about the same things here, the same voter suppression tactics. And so while the SAVE Act is a federal law, or a federal bill, I just want to bring it into the conversation, because everything I talk about with respect to this voting constitutional amendment applies the same with the SAVE Act. So you probably heard The SAVE Act is a bill that's going through Congress in DC, right? The House has passed the SAVE Act, the Senate has not. It's just sitting there. And every day I read some other commentary that, oh yeah, it's dead, and oh no, watch out, it's going to be passed. So I don't know, I don't have any insights on that. But the SAVE Act would require proof of citizenship to register to vote. So everything that we talk about tonight about what proof of citizenship, why it's such a problem, why it's so bad, why it's voter suppression, applies to the SAVE Act. Now, the justification for voter suppression bills, and in particular proof of citizenship, the justification is election integrity. We're going to prevent election fraud, right? That's what you hear. However, election fraud, non-citizens voting is statistically not happening in our country. So I pulled a graphic from made by the Heritage Foundation, which is a very right-leaning group, and they studied voter fraud over the course of, let me come over here so I can read it, over the course of about 20 years. And so they looked at 1 billion ballots, 1 billion with a B, looked at 1 billion ballots, okay, and found out of that billion, 77 cases where non-citizens who successfully cast a ballot, 10 cases where an undocumented immigrant cast a vote, which turns out to be what? 0.1, 2, 3, 4, 5 zeros, 764%. That is statistically insignificant. We do not have a problem with non-citizens voting. It is a crime to vote if you're not a citizen. You can't go to jail if you're not a citizen. And I think most non-citizens are far more worried about other things than trying to step in and cast an illegal ballot. It's just not happening. But it is the justification for all of these voter suppression bills. So, what would happen if the legislature passes a law that says we have to prove our citizenship? And again, this applies to the SAVE Act as well. So what that means is that in order to register to vote, you're going to have to provide either a birth certificate or a passport, or if you've been naturalized, if you become a citizen, your naturalization papers. That's the only 3 ways that you can prove your citizenship. So what that means is that Americans who aren't already registered to vote, if they don't have a passport or a birth certificate, or they have lost their naturalization papers, they're not going to be able to register to vote. And if they do want to get their paperwork so they can register to vote, it ain't free, right? Depending on where you ask for your birth certificate, if you lost your birth certificate, it costs you anywhere from $12 to $50 to request your birth certificate. And if you want to get your passport, of course, $135. If you've been naturalized and you lost your naturalization papers and they got burned up in a fire or whatever, you don't have the papers, it's over $500 to request copies of your naturalization papers. And so if you don't have any of these things and you got to get a birth certificate or a passport or your naturalization papers, I don't know about you, but I call that a poll tax. Like, that is, you have to pay money to be able to vote, right? But that's what's happening under the SAVE Act and all these voter suppression bills.
It's DPOC.
DPOC.
What is it?
So, I'm sorry, I didn't even, documentary proof of citizenship. We just call it DPOC for short. It means you have to prove your citizenship and you have to bring a document to prove it. Thank you, sorry, I did not make that clear. DPOC, documentary proof of citizenship. So, who's that gonna affect? Well, it's going to affect low-income individuals who can't afford their birth certificate or a passport. Young voters, how many young voters do you know who probably don't have their birth certificate? Elderly folks. Some elderly folks maybe were born in their home on a farm. They might not have a birth certificate. People of color. Women who married and changed their names. I'm going to get to that in a minute. We're going to break that down, what proof of citizenship would mean for women who have married and changed their names. Now, if you, for Americans who would need to either register for the first time or re-register, you move or you change your name because you got married. Actually, let me start over. So, the requirements to prove your citizenship: passport, birth certificate, naturalization papers. If you have a passport already, you good, okay? You have already proved to the United States government you are a citizen. So if you have a passport, that's easy, okay? That's easy. I say easy, but you're okay. It's the folks who don't have a passport, okay, who have to rely on proving their citizenship by bringing their birth certificate in. That's who this is really, really going to harm. And so, the way it works is that in order to register to vote, to even just register, you have to bring in your ID that you're going to be using to vote, because you have to show an ID to vote. But when you register to vote, you're going to have to bring your ID and your birth certificate. And if the name on your birth certificate needs to match the name on your license to show that's you. Like, that's me. I was born in these here United States. So what happens if the name on the license or the state identification does not match the birth certificate? Well, that is going to affect millions and millions of women. 80% of women change their name when they get married. And so, so it is going to disproportionately impact women, particularly lower income women who don't already have passports. It's going to affect women. So because if a woman or a man, but this is going to really affect women, if a woman brings in an ID and a birth certificate and the names don't match, she is going to have to bring in her proving documents, all of the documents that link how she got to this name. So let's take an example of what that might look like. So let's say that Abby Smith, okay, she was born, so Abby Smith is the name on her birth certificate. Let's say Abby Smith marries Sam Jones and takes his name. So now it's Abby Jones. Let's say Abby and Sam divorce, clutch your pearls, right? Abby and Sam divorce, and Abby Jones marries Fred Williams and takes Fred's name. So now Abby is Abby Williams. That's what's on her driver's license. So what that means is when Abby goes to register to vote, her name is going to be different than on her birth certificate. So she's going to need to bring those documents that link her name change, I call them proving documents. And so what that would look like is Abby's going to have to bring her birth certificate in, then she's going to have to bring her marriage certificate in to show why her name changed, right? Then her divorce paper to show that she could remarry, and then her second marriage certificate to show that now she is Abby Williams. Those three, she's going to have to find them, pay for them, and bring them in, and hope that that convinces whoever's taking her papers that she's actually a citizen. A dear friend of mine, who many of us know in the room, has been married about 50 years, and she said, I got married in a county courthouse in California 50 years ago. I don't even know where it is. I don't even know where to get my marriage certificate, right? So any sort of documentary proof of citizenship is bad for most people, but it's going to be really, really, really bad for women who have changed their name if they don't have a passport. Now, what that would mean, and the SAVE Act specifically provides for this, but what that would mean is if you have to prove your citizenship to register to vote, what that means is that you can only register to vote at a government office. You can only register to vote at an election office or the DMV, right? Because if you've got the League of Women Voters, Seal back there, who goes to all these events and trying to register high school kids and no more of that. Seal can't take documentary proof of citizenship. It can only be done by the government, right? So all of that community outreach, voter registration, would not happen any longer. Can't happen. You're going to have to go to an election office to register to vote. Also, if you're a fan of kansasvotes.org, where you can go on, I've had hundreds of people I have directed to ksvotes.org to register to vote, and this would take away, you have to have a government .gov address to be able to take any online registration. So the groups that do registration with a .org address, no more. So the real effect of that part of it is it's going to disparately impact, of course, voters with disabilities, right? Who have to actually go to an election office, who can't now just register to vote at the county fair because the League of Women Voters was there. Older voters, of course, military voters and their families. Where are they supposed to, how are they supposed to register? Young voters, rural voters, right? If they have to go to an election office to register to vote, that's going to affect whether maybe they can actually register to vote. So those particular groups of people are at risk of being disenfranchised, not even being able to register to vote. Now, who opposes this amendment? League of Women Voters, the ACLU of Kansas, and Loud Light. If you know of Loud Light, another really great organization who does good work. So that's who opposes it. Sometimes if you look at who opposes these bills, and I'll tell you, Pat Proctor, who is running for Secretary of State, he is the one who proposed this amendment. He is in favor of it. So I always looked at who's proposing it and who's against it. And then, you know, I do my research and analysis, but I can kind of tell usually what side I'm going to come down. So ACLU of Kansas, League of Women Voters, and Loud Light oppose this amendment. So I would suggest you vote no twice. Yeah. All right. That is my presentation. Does anybody have any questions that I probably can't answer, but I'll try? Yeah.
I just want to know about how to get access to this information. It's so clear on your slides.
How you get access to which information?
Your slides.
Oh, I can make my slides available if you'd like. Oh, totally. And I'll tell you one other thing. So Jim, let's remember that. I'll send you my slide. And here's the thing. If you're sitting in this audience and you're like, I got a book club who might want to hear this, or I'm literally going and talking to a homeowners association next week. Like a group of them were like, get somebody to tell us about this. If you are in a group or you know of a group that wants to hear about these amendments, I will come. I will come talk to anybody who wants to hear about these amendments. I am all about spreading the word. I don't care if it's 3 people. I don't care if it's 50. But I will be happy to make these slides available. And truly, if you can reach out to Jim and get to me, I will talk to anybody about these amendments. Yeah.
Does this necessity take place every time you go to vote from now on?
Which necessity?
Well, bringing all those documents. Like if I went and I had to have 3 of those documents and I got it the first time, do I need to take it every time I go to vote?
No. So the documents that you need to bring are to register to vote. Then when you go vote, you just show your ID. So it's the registration. So you can't even register without those documents. And one other thing, I'm so glad you mentioned that. You made me think of it. Some of you might be thinking, but I have a real ID. Shouldn't that work? Well, 5 out of 45 states, only 5 states, if you get a real ID, you have to prove your citizenship. In all the remaining 45 states, including Kansas, you have not had to prove your citizenship to get a real ID. Maybe you did. I took my birth certificate in, but it's not required that you show your birth certificate to get a real ID. So the real ID is not proof of citizenship, only in those 5 states where they make it proof of citizenship. So I'm glad you mentioned that. Yeah.
Is there anyone actually working in the U.S. passport to go get a passport? Is there time to actually get a
Well,
passport?
there is time, okay, there is time. And I'll tell you a true story. So my daughter, who's 34, with all of this stuff, she had a passport because we traveled and she was younger, but it expired. And so about 2 weeks ago, she was all excited and she said, Mom, I applied for my passport. And I was like, oh, that's great, honey. And she said, and it didn't mean anything to her because she's not really in this space. And she was like, yeah, I couldn't even put it on my credit card. I had to pay cash or pay a debit card. So, like, you have to have the $135 in your bank account today in order to even request your passport. If you're falling on hard times, you can't even put it on your bank credit card. Like, so that one kind of freaked me out. Yeah. No, I don't think so, because my daughters had passports when they were kids. A child passport, I understand that. If anybody knows differently, a child passport they have to renew every 5 years, okay? So because they change their appearance, we get 10 years as an adult. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. So it says on your passport, it's like exactly 10 years minus 1 day from the day that you got your passport. So. Well, if they got, well, let's say they got their passport at 16, okay? Then they're gonna have to renew their passport at 21. So if you get your passport when you're under the age of 18, you get 5 years until you have to renew it. Does that make sense? Sure? Yeah, totally. Yeah, no, I wanna make sure your grandchildren know what to do. Yeah, absolutely.
There have been so many twists in the system. Is there any chance that the language that you've got today can be changed before August 4th?
No, we have a representative here. I don't think so. I don't think so. This is what you're gonna see. Yeah. I don't think so. Again, Mike, do you have?
I don't think so.
Probably not. 95% chance this is what you're gonna see on your August and November ballot. Question.
So the amendment for the election, it's something to the effect of that, election rules by Congress, state Congress. So that means they could change the rules any which way they want over time. They could make district elected judges or this sort of thing.
So hold on, when you say they, just clarify who you're talking about. They. State legislature.
State legislature, yes.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's okay. No, that's okay.
So state legislature will make rules for these elections. It gives the power essentially to the legislature to write with that on establishing the rules for these elections.
For the election of Kansas Supreme Court justices,
Yes.
there wouldn't be any rules. They just run for election. That's the amendment. Like there wouldn't be any rules for the Kansas legislature. I mean, there might be some, but they will then, if that amendment passes, they're just gonna be like every other political candidate.
And they don't even have to have legal background, is that correct?
Right.
I could run for
You could
That's
run.
years of practice.
Right? But if you're a good politician.
Thank you.
Sorry. Which slide did you want me to go back to?
To the amendment.
I think I just messed us up here. They would have authority anyways. I don't know if that provision changes it. Did you have something to say over here, Mr. Lawyer?
I was wondering whether you would permit me just a moment to supplement.
Please, introduce yourself real quick.
My name is Bill Sampson, I'm a retired lawyer. You all remember Project 2025?
Yes.
Project 2025 had very smart people who happened to be very conservative people who thought about it, wrote it up, and now we're all getting to live with it. This amendment is, if you hear me say nothing else, remember this. This amendment is all about abortion. And some very smart people thought about how we get rid of abortion in Kansas. After the Dobbs case in 2022, we had a constitutional amendment, got on the ballot in 2024. And in one of the great moments of Kansas politics, Kansas citizens rejected it overwhelmingly. The very smart people who are conservatives in Kansas were paying attention. And so they thought about a couple of things. They thought about timing, and they thought about politics. It took 51 years for the smart conservatives in this country to get Roe versus Wade overturned. And it was a function of little by little getting the right president to appoint the right justices, and finally getting a majority. With the current system in Kansas, when they want to get rid of it, it's going to take too long, and it may never happen. And so the smart conservatives in Kansas have come up with this amendment. And if it passes, little by little, and I'll tell you in a minute my own view of how long that's going to take, we're going to have justices on the Kansas Supreme Court who have basically committed themselves to ruling against the current precedent and doing away with a constitutional right to abortion in Kansas. They will vote that way. They will campaign on it, and they will vote that way. How long is this going to take? It's now 2026. If this election goes the wrong way, and this amendment passes, you can start thinking about no abortion in Kansas in 4 years. So that's what this is about. Don't let anybody tell you anything different. And that's what we're going to get if we don't defeat this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, I appreciate that, Bill. And also, to think about, so, I'm gonna go back even a little bit further. So, how we even got that constitutional amendment on the ballot in 2022 was because of, in reaction to a decision by the Kansas Supreme Court that found that women had a state constitutional right to access abortion care. A case called Hoagies of Nassau versus Derek Schmidt. So that's why we got the amendment in 2022, because they were mad about the Kansas Supreme Court finding that our state constitution protected a woman's right to choose access to abortion care. So thank you for the addition. Good teamwork. Okay.
I have one clarification with when it comes to the qualifications, they currently have to be 30 years old in the Constitution and a lawyer. But to your question about provided by law, they could change the qualifications. So like statute says they're 10 years currently. So like that provided by law section would enable them to say, oh yeah, you just have to be past the bar in Kansas, and then they can have whatever qualifications, take them away, decide that they're district Supreme Court elections versus statewide Supreme Court elections. But to Amy's point, that's like, they currently have that power to create elections right now as a legislature, it's just that we don't have partisan elections right now. But that's just a little bit, yeah.
Thank you. And anything, I'm up here learning. This is probably my third presentation. I plan on giving as many as I need to up until August, November. So every time I'm learning new stuff. So thank you for adding it to the conversation. I appreciate it.
You said this, the Elon Musk example in Wisconsin is a great one. Is this unique elsewhere? Where else is it?
It's about half of the states have election of their, and even in some counties here in Kansas, we popularly elect our judges. And it's just never a good idea, whether we're talking Kansas Supreme Court judges or any sort of judge. So it's not like it's an anomaly. This isn't like we're way far out there. This is sort of common, semi-common practice.
And to be clear, if we go register people now, they will be registered and this will not apply to them.
Correct. Unless they move and they need to re-register. Yeah.
Can I tell a quick story? Oops. Okay, here's tell my quick story. The whole idea that you just get your birth certificate and get an ID, it's just insane. I moved my mom out here in her 80s from she had been in North Carolina. She wanted to fly. I mean, she had gotten here, and after a year or so, her driver's license, well, we took a driver's license away. So she wanted an ID. She needed a state frickin' ID to get on an airplane to go see her other daughters, and I was all for that. Good idea. So we go in to get it, and we have her expired driver's license, right? And they said, well, we have her expired driver. We had 2 expired driver's licenses, because she saved things. We had 2 expired passports. We had, she's standing next to me, saying, no, this is me. and because of COVAX, whatever was happening at that point, it's like, no, you have to now have a birth certificate because these are expired. She was born in New York City in 1924. Oh my God, let's see. Oh, those records disappeared. And again, I think it was a fire or something. We had a copy of her birth certificate. But no, it had to be an issue. You couldn't just have a copy of the birth certificate. It had to be issued, officially issued. Going to New York State, I'm talking to them, and it was, we're going around in circles, going around in circles, going around in circles. And then she realized, I said, Mom, you can't even vote. And then she got pissed. She said, well, I've always voted. And I said, well, yeah. We went, I'm just saying, 2 passports, 2 driver's licenses, all this other stuff, and we didn't want to drive. All we wanted was a state ID, for Kansas. And so she could get on an airplane, and then so she could vote. And it took months and months. I went to Topeka. I'm standing at the Secretary of State office like, this is ridiculous. Here's what I've got. We're standing in the DMV office, and she's standing next to me, and she was all, because she's looking, and she's going, look, and with the New York accent, I'm this person. You see my face? I'm this person. I've always been this person. Fine. Somebody, Kansas, the Lawrence DMV, after our 4th trip in, wrote the law and just gave her an ID. Because but that was it. It wasn't just even a one-time thing. It was insane. And if I hadn't really needed to get her on a plane to go at some point, I think we would have just given up after the first
When
one.
did this happen? When?
Yeah.
When did this happen?
Excuse me?
When did this happen?
This would have been pre-COVID, when COVID was really into this whole thing of, and I guess she died in 2020, and so it would have been like 4 years before that.
I can tell you it's still in effect. I had to do it with my mother-in-law.
Yeah, no, it was not decades ago. It was within the last 8 years. Yeah.
So thank you for sharing that story, and I want to bring up another thing. I'm so happy that it ended okay for your mom, but I'm going to say that it provides that if a person thinks that a poll worker registered someone to vote without proper documentation, they can turn them in, and the poll worker faces criminal sanctions. So that person would have never given your mom an ID because they would have been scared of being criminally prosecuted. It's scary.
I think I'm one of those weirdos that send emails to Marshall and Grant every day. you need to know that, Marshall, loves to say that. And even though, you know, I tell him constantly he's an idiot, gee, I would appreciate this.
Amy, you mentioned a third proposed constitutional amendment. Where is it, and what do you think is the prospects of it getting on the ballot?
I am not up to speed. I know that there has been talk about property tax amendment, and I don't even know what it is. I don't know. But I also know that the property tax, the voter suppression, and the election of judges aren't the only ones that have been talked about as far as adding them onto our ballot. I think, Logan and I were just talking about it, I don't think they can add any more onto the ballot at this point, but I just don't know enough about the process. And I have not dug in on I only dug in on the ones I knew that were gonna be on our ballot, so I don't have great information for you on that, so sorry.
Could we ask the question of the attorney over here about the Heritage Foundation?
Bill? You're getting a question.
Could we ask the question about the Heritage Foundation? So many of us in Kansas have kind of heard about it off and on over the years.
I may not know anything about it.
I know, but is it the group, a very conservative group, that is funded partially by the Koch brothers in Wichita?
I don't know.
But it has a lot of patience, doesn't it?
Yes.
So over the years,
These
it's
conservative groups
just
have lots and lots of.
doggedly.
But the Kansas people have run out of patience. They don't want to wait. They want it right now.
Gotcha.
You know, whether a comment, whether this amendment in November passes, the voter suppression amendment passes or not, the damage is being done now. So besides wearing out Amy coming to speak to all of us and sharing her slides with everyone you know, I think it's incumbent upon all of us to say to people, your voting rights have not been taken. Make sure you exercise them. You don't have to bring your passport. I don't know how many people have asked us in the league when they come up to our table, I have to bring my passport when I go vote?
Confusion.
Misinformation and the confusion and the chaos of these many federal and state voting suppression laws that have been proposed, whether or not they passed, and is undermining the electorate. So
And that's-
we all need to talk to everyone.
And I was gonna say, that's not a bug, that's a feature. That's intentional. Kelly?
I just want to shout out about the Heritage Foundation, if you want to know more about that and the Koch brothers and their long-term plans for gaining control over our institutions. There's a book out called Democracy in Chains by Nancy McLean. Our book club with Women for Kansas just read it and had a discussion last month. And it's amazing, and it connects the dots from Brown v. Board of Education and the reaction against desegregation over time with connections to people, the Koch brothers, the foundations, and it's illuminating. So Democracy in Chains, there's at least one copy at the library, but it's a very good book to read about.
Who's the author of that?
Nancy McLean, M-A-C, capital L-E-A-N.
We'll donate more books to, we will donate more of those books to the library.
Great.
Agreed, preach.
Well, in reaction to that, I think we organize. We share the knowledge and information that you have. I mean, first of all, inform everyone to vote
know more about any of the information that's presented tonight, you'd like to know more about what you can do to take action, all politics are local, right? Thank you for coming out. It shows your advocacy right now, but now we got to take that to the next step. So at Leading Kansas, what we've discussed is a 10 by 10 initiative. You have 10 people that you have influence over. And we want you to have conversations like these with them, whether they agree with you politically or not. And then ask them to have conversations with 10 people. Because it's all going to start with a grassroots organization. That's where it all begins. There's a couple of, here's just a,
One more comment. Amy mentioned Pat Proctor, who's a current legislator who's opposed these, is running for Secretary of State. Is that correct?
Yep.
One of his opponents her name is Jennifer Day. She's a Democrat. She's running against him. And so that, among all the elections, who's important, they're all important. If Pat Proctor becomes Secretary of State,
right.
and he's already proposing this, that's an important election to watch. So I'm going to hold next to Jennifer Day, but if anybody wants one, and her up and
Yeah,
support her.
Proctor was. Thank you, Amy. Thank you.